Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing Bristol 1350 from Facade Games and part of the Dark City trilogy, or quadrilogy. I don't actually know how many there are in this. There's a bunch of games, all looking like books on your shelf, but involving various cities, having dark themes, all of that. And Bristol 1350 is a hidden role game that involves transferring the plague or not, depending on your objectives. You see, every player will start with 2 symptom cards, and the values they start with are between 1 and 3, although specifically, if they do end up with 2 3s, they return them, because once you have above 6 in symptoms, you are basically infected. So the goal of the game is that you starting off, you might be anywhere between 1 and 5, or 2 and 5 in terms of how infected you are, but no one actually has crossed that threshold yet. The goal is to either be the first people in these various wagons to cross the finish line, to travel through the city and cross the finish line while being uninfected, or if at any point you become infected, and somebody will become infected as you play, then your goal is that, well, everyone else dies, basically, that no one else actually survives in the game, and then all the infected players would win the game. That's basically the gameplay, the goal of Bristol 1350. The gameplay will involve every single round you're going to be taking one action, and then plus playing various remedy cards. You see, every player is going to be dealt remedy cards, and there are actions you can take to draw more remedy cards. There are actions you can take to maneuver your positioning on the wagon. You can elbow your way to the front of any wagon. You can go ahead and jump back to a prior wagon, or you can jump ahead to another wagon. So in the case of this situation over here, you can have this person jumping to the back of that wagon. There's a few different repositioning elements that can go on as you maneuver around the board. But then past that, the main thing you're trying to be mindful of is who's infected, how are cards being transferred around, and what can you do to ensure that you're not infected and not on a wagon with infected players. Because when I said you have to be among the healthy players leaving the city, you cannot have infected people on your wagon, or you then lose. So let's go ahead and we're going to roll the dice. Every player is going to start the round by rolling dice, and then from there, the person in the front of the wagon will start moving first, and your goal, your options on your turn are either to take an action to rearrange or potentially to re-roll some dice. You see, the wagons will be moving equal to the color of the dice they roll. That's the good news. The bad news is if any wagon has 2 or more rats on that face. You see, we have 2 apples and 2 rats, but since that wagon has 2 rats, they'll be doing a bit of a mingling on that wagon where they're going to draw a card from the deck, which is more likely to be one of those higher value cards, those 3s, those 4s, whatever. You're going to add it to the various players in the wagon, shuffling it up, and that can cause a rearrangement. Even if a 4 is not added, you may now end up with 2 3s. Every player will get back 2 cards, look at those cards, and take a look and see if they are infected. I got a 2 and a 4 over here. I'm now infected. This player is infected. I'm just going to look at my thing. I don't know what else is going on. But that's basically the mingling idea. So let's go ahead and go through a quick sequence here. Over here, that first player, let's say we're going with brown over here. I'm not going to execute everyone's turn. In fact, what I'll do is I'll focus on specific people's turns and how they would play out. Someone in the brown wagon would potentially want to re-roll 2 dice because they like the fact that they have 3 dice, but they don't want to have 2 rats. And beautiful. They kept one of those apples, but they switched to that. Someone else now goes ahead and re-rolls 2 of these because they don't want them going ahead that far. They managed to change it to that and then that. Other players maneuver, knocking each other around, and at the end of the round, we'll go ahead and move 1, 2, 3, going through city, 1, 2, 3 over 1, 2, 3, and then we'll go ahead and move white 1, and then we'll move 1, 2, 3, 1, and then move red 2. That would be the positioning over there. You're going to rinse and repeat that cycling as you travel through the city until you hit the end, drawing remedy cards, using their various abilities. You'll have abilities on the remedy cards that can switch things up. So if you try to move forward towards the front of the wagon, I might stop you. I might do different things. They'll allow you to lock dice, to re-roll dice, to manipulate the dice in different ways, to manipulate the wagons in different ways, things like that. And then finally we have these roll cards. Every player can be dealt a roll card, and then that will give you your own special ability, usually an action that you can take that other players cannot take, that changes up the game a bit. And that is basically Bristol 1350. Roll dice, manipulate the wagons, manipulate your positioning in the wagons, try to ensure that you are uninfected as long as possible, and if you are uninfected, try to ensure that the other players in your wagon are also uninfected, either by just, hoping that they're uninfected or knocking people out who are acting suspicious. And then if you become infected, try to ensure that nobody else wins the game. That's the general idea of the game as far as the review part of things, starting with preferences and biases. I love hidden role games as a genre. I love the doublethink, the bluffing, the backstabbery that's involved in hidden role games. And then moving specifically to Bristol 1350, starting with art and components. The art and components are all fine. It has a dark theme. It's part of the Dark Series trilogy. It leans heavily into that. All does a job. Neither pulls me forward or pushes me against it. All just fine stuff. Cards. The mat's nice. I don't have anything particularly negative or positive to say about art and components. As far as theme and narrative, this theme is the plague, which may or may not work for you, may or may not bother you. For me, it doesn't bother me. I don't mind the plague. COVID and everything has definitely changed our lives, but this is still abstracted Black Death and whatnot. Less abstracted than it used to be. Doesn't bother me, but, you know, it's a game about transferring the plague and trying to ensure that other players die if you are going to die. So a little bit of a potentially dark theme to be wary of there. As far as the narrative, there's no real narrative past the inherent, you know, trying to escape the city in wagons and trying to stay alive. No real narrative to the game itself. As far as the player count, as far as ease of play, the game has short rules. Like, the rule book's got a few pages you have to read through. It is easy to read through. It is easy to teach. The game has minimal player space. I mean, everything set up, even with 9 players, will be an absolute minimal table space, and it's a 20 to 30 minute play time, maybe 40 minutes if you're playing with a bunch of players, like, you know, with 9 players or for the first time or stuff like that. But it's a fairly quick game on all counts, so very easy to table. As far as player count, this is a 1 to 9 player game. I'll say that again. This is a 1 to 9 player game. This game hosts a large player count options, although for myself, I've only played it at 5 and 6, which is particularly relevant since Board Game Geek, BGG, has this rated as being best in the 6 to 9 range, the more players there are on the table. So I have played it at 6, but I've played it at only 5 and 6 players, so 6 to 9 is the theoretical best player count according to Board Game Geek. As far as the review things, what I liked, all that stuff, starting with what I like, the card deck allows for manipulation of the core basic actions. You can stock up on some of these cards, use them as extra actions, which is really important, because there's a lot of back and forth. So these extra actions, getting your cards in play so that you can make the right move at the right time when it's situational, that allows for a lot of things going on there. There are some hilarious moments in the game. Things like ghost cards, an empty cart with no players, and this will have to be relevant at 6 players or fewer, but you'll have empty carts just racing ahead on their own, which is amusing. You'll have pushing people back, forward, knocking them back. You'll have someone on your wagon who you think is someone who's loaded with the plague, and then you'll conspire with the other player on your wagon to knock them out, to elbow them out, shooting them to the wagon behind you. The game has a lot of fun, not necessarily thematic moments, but just manipulation of other players and abuse of power in ways that end up being fairly amusing to go through. And there's a lot of tenseness in both sides of wherever side you're on. If you're healthy, there's tenseness in remaining healthy, and every single mingle presents an opportunity. And then there's tenseness around who's in my wagon, how can I figure out what they are, what their level of a plague or symptoms are, and how can I ensure that I actually leave the city winning. And then if you're on the plague side, you're panicked that anyone else will win, and so you're doing your best to make sure that none of the uninfected win the game, either by making sure they don't cross the city at all in time, or making sure that there are no healthy carts, spreading your symptoms and spreading things around as much as possible to ensure that nobody healthy leaves the city. Again, dark, but ends up being amusing and tense in its actual gameplay and implementation. As far as nitpicks concerns, things to be aware of, trusting people to tell the truth is a part of this game. You see, if my symptoms are currently 6, like 4 and 2 over here, and if I later get rid of that 4 and end up with that was a 4 again, end up with a 3, my cards will show that I'm not currently infected. In theory, players can be infected, then not be infected, and then lie and say they never were infected. It would be hard to track that information down. So obviously you have to be playing this game with people who aren't cheaters. In general, my recommendation is don't play games with people you don't trust. Every game has opportunities for cheating. It's just a question of how easy it is. This game does make it easier to cheat, but don't play games with cheaters is my general advice there. As far as more meaningful critiques, to begin with, there is way too much randomness in this game. Absolutely way too much randomness. Hidden rules at least hidden rules when I'm looking for hidden rules. It's all about the strategy and deduction, and then yes, reading the players is part of that. But in Bristol 1350, 90% of it comes down to reading the players, and then it's just randomness. There's no real opportunity to deduce, but you did this, and you did that, and you did that. It's just a chaotic fest of hoping you're not infected, hoping you don't become infected, and then just hoping and playing it out for the best. And there's also a lot of back and forth actions that are frustrating. You take your single action to elbow to the front of the cart, and then someone else does the exact same thing, defeating the point of what you just did. You need to rely on the remedy cards to get any sense of real progress, or you're just victim to whatever the other players do to directly undermine the thing you just tried to do. It feels not so much like a tug of war, but more like a waste of time at times. As far as final thoughts and rating, as far as final thoughts and score in Bristol 1350, This one's a 2.5 out of 5 for me. I did not love Bristol 1350. I had fun times with it. I enjoyed my those moments I talked about, those fun moments, the tenseness, the enjoyable laughter moments. I've had all that. There are fun moments to be had in Bristol 1350, but it doesn't execute and it doesn't check off on what I'm looking for personally out of a social deduction hidden roll game. For me, I want the deduction to be part of it. I want the other facets of the game where I can deduce and slowly play out, not necessarily narrowing it down to exact perfection. There is a degree of reliance on detecting other players and relying on their actions, the ways they play things out, and reading into things. That absolutely is present. But there's enough of a framework in other styles of games in this genre that gives me more what I'm looking for. Bristol 1350 leans more heavily into the party mode of things. The fun is there. The social elements are there. The moments of trying to win amongst chaoticness and hoping you don't know what's going on and hoping you can stay hidden if you're infected. It has all that, but it leans far more heavily into the party mode fun part of the things as opposed to the strategy part of things, which may well make this a game for you to enjoy, especially if you don't like the tenseness, if you don't like the deduction aspect of some of these games. Bristol 1350 gives you the opportunity to experience the general genre without that. But for me, that's not what I'm looking for, and so this is one that I'm fine playing, but certainly not looking to play or seek out. As far as other recommendations, if you're in this for the theme, if you just want to a plague theme for some reason, Pandemic is obviously the way I'd go. On the plus side, you're actually trying to cure things there and not kill them. And then if you want something that has a little bit of a chaos in its social deduction, in its hidden rolls, then One Night Ultimate Werewolf can give that to you, but with a lot more deduction and strategy built into the engine while maintaining the fun and the chaos. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Hope you found this video helpful, and as always, have a good one.